Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're going to be looking at schizophrenia and schizoaffective disorder.
Okay.
These terms I feel like are often used interchangeably, but I don't think most people know what the actual difference between the two is.
Right. Yeah, they're definitely two distinct diagnoses, but the line between them can get pretty blurry sometimes.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
So let's start with just like a basic definition of schizophrenia.
Okay, so schizophrenia is a chronic brain disorder that affects a person's thinking, feeling, and behavior.
Hmm. Okay, so right off the bat, brain disorder, so like a physical problem.
Exactly. It's not a weakness or a character flaw, it's an actual change in the way the brain functions.
Okay, so I guess we can get into that a little later, but as far as the definition goes, it affects thinking, feeling, and behavior. Like how?
So people with schizophrenia can have trouble distinguishing what's real from what's not. It can lead to hallucinations, delusions, disorganized speech and thinking, and unusual behaviors.
Wait, hold on. You're talking about like actually losing touch with reality?
Yeah, that's one of the hallmarks of schizophrenia, unfortunately.
Uh-huh.
It's not always a constant thing, but it can be really frightening and disorienting for the person experiencing it.
Okay, yeah, I can only imagine. So, hallucinations and delusions, those sound intense. What are those like?
So hallucinations are basically sensory experiences that aren't real, like hearing voices, seeing things others don't see, even feeling things that aren't there.
Oh, wow, that's heavy. And delusions.
Delusions are strongly held beliefs that are not based in reality.
Okay.
So, for example, someone might believe that they have superpowers or that people are plotting against them.
So it's more than just like weird thoughts or daydreams. It's like they actually believe these things are happening.
Exactly. And it can be very difficult to convince someone otherwise, even with evidence to the contrary.
Wow, I'm starting to understand how serious this is. So what causes all of this? Like, why does someone develop schizophrenia?
Well, it's complex. There's no one single cause. It's likely a combination of genetic factors, meaning if you have a family history of the disorder, you may be at higher risk,
Okay.
along with brain chemistry imbalances and environmental factors.
Brain chemistry, huh? What does that even mean?
So our brains rely on neurotransmitters, these chemical messengers, to function properly.
Okay.
And with schizophrenia, there seem to be imbalances in certain neurotransmitters, like dopamine and serotonin.
I see. So those imbalances mess with the way the brain processes information and experiences the world.
Exactly. And then you have environmental factors like exposure to viruses during pregnancy, childhood trauma, stressful life events.
So basically, a whole bunch of things could play a role.
Yes, it's really a perfect storm of different factors that come together. And it's still an area of active research. We're still learning a lot about it.
Okay, so we've covered a lot about schizophrenia, but how does schizoaffective disorder fit into this picture?
Right. So schizoaffective disorder is kind of like a hybrid.
A hybrid.
Yeah, you get the psychotic symptoms of schizophrenia, but they're combined with significant mood episodes like depression or mania.
Okay, so it's not just that someone with schizophrenia also happens to feel sad sometimes. It's like a bigger deal than that.
Exactly. The mood symptoms are a central part of schizoaffective disorder, not just a secondary feature.
Got it. So the mood swings are much more intense and longer lasting than you might see in someone with just schizophrenia.
Right. The mood episodes can actually last for weeks or even months at a time.
Okay, so how do you even tell the difference then? It seems pretty subtle.
It can be tough, even for professionals. But a big clue is the prominence and duration of those mood episodes.
Okay, we'll have to dive into that more, I think. But first, I
Yeah.
think it's time for a quick break.
So we were talking about how to tell the difference between schizophrenia and schizoaffective disorder.
Yeah, it's a bit of a head scratcher. What are the key things to look for?
Well, like I mentioned before, it all comes down to those mood episodes.
Right, right. How prominent they are, how long they last.
Exactly. In schizoaffective disorder, those mood episodes are front and center. They're not just a passing thing. They can last for weeks, months even, and really impact someone's life.
Okay, so it's not just about having mood swings. It's about how central they are to the overall picture.
Exactly. Think of it like this. In schizophrenia, the main thing is the psychosis, the hallucinations, the delusions. Any mood stuff is kind of secondary to that.
Okay, so the mood issues are kind of like a side effect of the schizophrenia, but with schizoaffective disorder, the mood episodes are a main player.
Yeah, you got it. It's like they're woven into the very fabric of the condition. And because of that, the treatment approaches are different too.
Oh, right, because you're dealing with two different things at once. So how do you treat schizoaffective disorder?
Well, medication is usually a big part of it, but it's not just about antipsychotics like with schizophrenia. You often need a combination of meds to address both the psychotic symptoms and the mood episodes.
So you might have antipsychotics and then also things like mood stabilizers or antidepressants.
Right. It's about finding the right balance to target all aspects of the condition. It can take some trial and error to find the best combination.
That makes sense. So with all this complexity, how does someone even get diagnosed? Like, how do you figure out what's going on?
It starts with a thorough evaluation by a mental health professional.
Okay, so you go see a psychiatrist or a psychologist.
Right. They'll ask you a lot of questions about your symptoms, your history, your family history. They might do some psychological testing too.
So they're really trying to get the full picture, not just a snapshot.
Yeah, it's like putting together a puzzle. They need all the pieces to see the whole picture. And even then, sometimes it can be challenging to make a definitive diagnosis right away.
Especially if the symptoms are still developing or changing.
Exactly.
Mm.
Sometimes the picture becomes clearer over time as they learn more about your experiences.
Okay, that makes sense. So once they have a diagnosis, then they can start figuring out the best treatment plan.
Right. And that plan will likely involve a combination of medication, therapy, and support services. But even before we get to treatment, I think it's important to talk about what causes these conditions in the first place.
Yeah, we touched on that a little earlier, but it's definitely a complex topic. What are some of the main factors that contribute to schizophrenia and schizoaffective disorder?
Well, genetics definitely plays a role. If you have a close relative with one of these conditions, your risk is higher.
So family history is a big clue, but not a guarantee.
Exactly. And then there's brain chemistry. Like we talked about before, imbalances in certain neurotransmitters, like dopamine and serotonin, are thought to be involved.
Right, those chemical messengers in the brain can really throw things off balance.
Yeah. And we can't forget about environmental factors, things like exposure to viruses during pregnancy or trauma or stress early in life.
It's like this intricate dance between our genes and our environment. So much can influence how our brains develop and function.
Exactly. And even drug use, especially marijuana, has been linked to an increased risk, particularly for those who are already genetically predisposed.
So it's really a combination of factors, not just one single cause.
You got it. It's like a perfect storm of different things coming together. But the good news is, even though we don't have all the answers, we do have effective treatments. Medication is often essential for managing symptoms, but therapy also plays a huge role.
Oh yeah, what kinds of therapy are helpful for these conditions?
Well, one that's often used is cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT.
Okay, I've heard of CBT, but how does it work for something like schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder?
So CBT helps people identify and change negative thought patterns and behaviors. Like someone with schizophrenia might have a delusion that people are trying to hurt them.
That must be terrifying.
It is. But with CBT, they can learn to challenge those thoughts, to question whether they're really true.
So it's about gaining more control over those thoughts and not letting them control you.
Right. And CBT also teaches coping skills for managing stress and anxiety, which can often make symptoms worse.
So it's like giving people a toolbox of strategies to deal with the challenges of these conditions.
Exactly. It's about empowering people to take an active role in their recovery.
This is all so fascinating. It's amazing how much we're learning about the brain and mental health. But I think we need to shift gears a bit now and talk about the human side of these conditions. What's it actually like to live with schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder?
Yeah, that's a really important part of the conversation, and it's something we'll dive into after a quick break.
We're back and ready to dig into what it's really like living with these conditions.
Yeah, it's one thing to understand the symptoms and the diagnosis, but it's another thing altogether to grasp the day-to-day reality for someone with schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder.
It really struck me looking at some of the materials you sent, the images of people working, socializing, having families. It really challenges the stereotypes, doesn't it?
It definitely does. These conditions can be incredibly challenging, but they don't have to define a person's entire life.
Yeah, one of the sources actually said something like, recovery is not about erasing the condition, it's about learning to live a full life alongside it.
That's a great way to put it. It's about finding ways to manage the symptoms, to cope with the challenges, and to build a life that's rich and meaningful.
So for someone listening who might be struggling with one of these conditions, or maybe they know someone who is, what would you say is the most important takeaway from all of this?
I think the most important thing is to remember that there is hope. Recovery is possible, and with the right support, people with schizophrenia and schizoaffective disorder can lead fulfilling lives.
Support seems to be a key theme here. Family, friends, Therapists, support groups.
Absolutely. Having a strong support network can make all the difference in the world. It provides a sense of belonging, of understanding, of not being alone in this journey.
And it's not just about emotional support, right? It's also about practical help, like navigating the healthcare system, finding housing, or managing daily tasks.
Exactly. It's about having people who can help you advocate for yourself, who can offer guidance and assistance when you need it most. And thankfully, there are so many amazing organizations out there that provide these kinds of support services.
Yeah, places like NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, they do incredible work. And of course, there's the NIMH, the National Institute of Mental Health, a fantastic resource for information and research.
Absolutely. These organizations are lifelines for so many people. And, as we wrap up, I think it's important to address the elephant in the room, stigma.
You're right, the stigma surrounding mental illness is still a huge problem. It prevents people from seeking help, it fuels discrimination, and it isolates those who are struggling.
We need to keep talking about mental health, keep challenging stereotypes, and keep fighting for better understanding and acceptance.
Well said. We've covered a lot of ground today, but I think the biggest takeaway for me is this. Schizophrenia and schizoaffective disorder are serious conditions, but they don't define a person.
Exactly. There's always hope, always help available, and always the possibility of living a meaningful life. Never forget that.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.